I've brought you into my studio this morning in order to show you the different keys of the Native American flutes that I make. I make flutes in the key of B all the way through the key of C, high B, low C. The high B flute, which you see lying here on this serape, is 18.5 inches long. The C flute on the other end of the spectrum is 30 inches long. The B, as I said, is high. And the C at the other end is very low. There are flutes in other keys than the ones that I make. Some people make them all the way from very little flutes like this, that sound like little Tweety birds, down to flutes that are 4 feet long, and you have to play them from the side because you can't even reach your hands down in order to be able to get to the holes. These are in the mid-range, and they're the common keys of flutes that people play. This B flute. A B would be a good flute for a child, 7 years old. I started my kids on a B flute. As you can see, for an adult, the fingers are a little crowded together, but it's still very doable. That's a B flute. The next key up the scale is this A flute. It's probably the most common flute for a starter flute for people. Holes are nice and close together. You can easily cover them without having to stretch your fingers. So that's a nice little A flute. The next key that I make, and there's a G sharp between the A and the G. I don't make a G sharp. It's a very uncommon key, and there's no demand for it, so I don't really make them, except on special order sometimes. Now, one thing about the different keys of the flutes is that most people consider that these flutes the sound has a relationship to different parts of the human body and the different chakras, the different energy centers in the human body. The G flute that you just heard, the energy center is up here perhaps in the throat area somewhere. And when you play that fundamental, you can actually, when you are sensitive to it, you can actually feel where the sound is in your body. This flute is an F sharp. That F sharp flute is considered to be in the heart chakra area of the body. It's the most common key of the Native American flute. The holes are relatively close together. As you can see, there's not a lot of difference between the G and the F sharp. And you notice that the holes become slightly farther apart as the keys go lower. The flute's a little bit longer and the holes are a little farther apart, which makes it a little bit more difficult for a beginner to play the F sharp than the G. But as you can see, maybe a 1/4 of an inch difference, nothing that presents an insurmountable barrier. The next flute key that I make is this F. And with the F, flute, the size of the bore, this is the bore of the flute, the hollow section of the flute, goes from a 7/8 inch bore to a 1 inch bore. And this changes the quality of the sound. Even though it's only one step on the piano, one note on a piano difference between the two, as you can determine by listening, I'll compare the two together. You get a bigger, rounder, fuller kind of a sound. A little more meditative, a little more soothing type of a sound. When you start to get lower, the holes start to get farther apart. So the F sharp was a bit of a reach for the hands. Now you're getting an even more of a reach with the F. But again, it's definitely within the range of the doable. From the F we go to the E. And the area of the body that the E is affecting is getting down here in the solar plexus. We're descending. The lower the note, the more we get down towards the root of the body. This flute is an E flat, also called a D sharp, and it's a rather unusual key, but a very interesting one. For me, the scale in a E flat flute is very melancholy. This is a very almost a sad kind of a sound. The next key that I make is a D. And as you can see, I'm going from a 1-inch bore to a 1 1/8 inch bore now. So this is an even wider bored flute and a hollower sound. You start to get into a feeling of, oh, I don't know, you're playing down a well. And as you can see, now we're talking about a pretty big flute here, and my fingers are, making a good stretch in comparison, for example, to this F sharp. You can see how the holes are really starting to, become farther apart. Big one here, a C, and the C is demanding even for me. Now I've had to move the hole up the bore of the flute in order to make it possible to play this flute. And when you move the hole up the bore, the hole has to become smaller. So that creates sometimes a bit of a drop-off in the tonal volume between the fundamental note and the second note. Just a little bit here. This flute sounds pretty good. So anyhow, here you have it. A range of keys and a range of sounds, of course, and you can start at one end, most people do, with a G or an A, and then as your flexibility and your sensitivity develops, because the lower keyed flutes are harder to play than the upper keyed flutes. They just a little more sensitive to breath pressure. Of course, the finger stretch is a little greater. So it's something that people usually graduate into as time goes by. I hope this has helped you to gain a little bit more understanding about the different flutes and the different flute keys. I look forward to talking to you again sometime. Thank you.